Um, no, Your Honor. I have nothing preliminarily that needs to be brought up.
Mr. Shaw?
No.
Mr. Janice?
No.
Ms. Barco?
No, Your Honor.
Elaine, anything you want to address before we get started? Ms. Hamilton, anything you want to address before we get started?
Yeah, I'm firing my lawyer.
Okay. Do you have another
I'm
one that's
done.
prepared to represent you today?
No, I do not.
Okay. Well, we're going to proceed today. I'm going to have Mr. Schrapp stay on as your lawyer throughout these proceedings. And
Great.
if you hire a new lawyer at some point to represent you, that's fine. You could have done that any time prior to making this request today. But if you don't have a lawyer here to represent you today, I'm not going to excuse Mr. Schrapp. You understand?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For my first witness, Your Honor, I'd like to call Mr. Jerome Pete Reed from Forensic Fluids. And who's your employer, Mr. Reed?
Forensic Fluids Laboratories in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
And what do you do for Forensic Fluids Laboratories?
I'm a certified scientist.
And what sort of educational background do you have to be a certifying scientist?
Well, I received my bachelor's degree from Wheaton College. Shortly after Wheaton, I studied chemistry at Harvard. After Harvard, I studied physiological psychology at Tufts.
Okay. And how long have you been employed as a certifying scientist by Forensic Fluids?
By Forensic Fluids, 4 years. Over the course of my career, 15 years.
Okay. And what are some of your responsibilities as a certifying scientist?
We certify the legitimacy and accuracy of all toxicological reports issued by Forensic Fluids Laboratories.
So would those include drug screening results?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Reed, have you ever been certified as an expert witness in the area of toxicology in the state of Michigan?
Yes, sir.
And in which courts have you been certified as an expert witness?
I cannot begin to tell you. I've been an expert witness and testified well over 150 times in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, Texas.
Okay. And does your current employment as a certifying scientist require any sort of continuing education?
Yes, sir.
What are those continuing education requirements?
Essentially, you have to make sure that you complete at least 12 a year, and I'm already at 36 at this point.
Okay. Your Honor, at this point, I would like to move to have Mr. Reed admitted as an expert witness in the area of toxicology based on his testimony here today.
Anybody have an objection to that?
No objection.
Oh.
All right. That would be so noted for the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Reed, are you familiar with any samples or drug screens collected from a Miss Janet Hamilton?
Yes, sir.
And were those screens conducted by Forensic Fluids Laboratories?
Yes, sir, they were.
Okay. Approximately how many screens were tested by Forensic Fluids Laboratory regarding Miss Hamilton?
23.
Okay.
And
what was the earliest? What was the earliest?
Hold on just a second. Ms. Hamilton, I need you to be quiet. You're not the witness right now. There is a witness. You're interrupting on the record. It doesn't help your case. Okay?
Yep.
I can't mute you if that would help. Would you rather be muted?
no.
I can unmute you if you need to talk, but if you do it again, I'll just mute you so we can't hear what you're saying.
Man, just mute me, please. Just mute me. Thank you. Because I don't.
Mr. Salasina, go ahead.
Mr. Reed, what was the earliest sample date run by Forensic Fluids for Miss Hamilton?
The earliest one we have is a sample that was collected on 5/27 of 2022.
And what were the results of that screening?
The results for the sample that was collected on 5/27 of 2022, the specimen ID for the sample is S4078381. The sample was positive for delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, at 35.0 nanograms per mil.
Okay. And what was the date of the next sample collected and evaluated by Forensic Fluids Laboratories for Miss Hamilton?
The sample that was collected on 6/2 of 2022, The sample was positive for THC at 13.5 nanograms per mil.
And what was the next sample collected and evaluated by forensic fluids for Miss Hamilton?
The sample that was collected on 6/9 of 2022, the sample was positive for methamphetamine at 42.3 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 22.4 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 954.7 nanograms per mil.
Does, to your knowledge, does Miss Hamilton have any prescriptions that could explain a positive test result for amphetamine?
No, sir.
Okay. What was the next sample from Miss Hamilton that was evaluated by forensic fluids?
The sample was collected on 6/14 of 2022. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 2,134.1 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 214.9 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 113.7 nanograms per mil.
Okay. What was the next sample collection date for Miss Hamilton?
This sample was collected on 8/5 of 2022. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 2,817.7 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 132.3 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 239.1 nanograms per mil.
What was the next sample tested for Miss Hamilton?
This sample was collected on 8/25 of 2022. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 2,451.4 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 579.2 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 10.6 nanograms. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 1,018.7 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 266.6 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 4.1 nanograms per mil. Was positive for amphetamine at 12 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 3.8 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 11.7 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 58.9 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 64.9 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 34.6 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 2.8 nanograms. Was positive for methamphetamine at 144.6 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 30.3 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 28.5 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 161.5 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 43.7 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 376.8 nanograms. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 124.7 nanograms. The sample was positive for THC at 33.9 nanograms per mil. This sample was collected on 10/7 of 2020. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 81.5 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 242.5 nanograms per mil. Collected 10/18 of 2022 was positive for methamphetamine at 2,391.9 nanograms per mil. Was positive for methamphetamine at 863.1 nanograms per mil. Was positive for methamphetamine at 161.3 nanograms. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 650.7 nanograms per mil. This sample collected on 2/2 of 2023 was positive for methamphetamine at 988.8 nanograms per mil.
By my record, what was the last sample that you guys collected from Miss Hamilton?
This sample was collected on 3/14 of 2023. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 561.1 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 220.3 nanograms per mil. The sample was also positive for THC at 116.4 nanograms per mil.
With respect to amphetamine and methamphetamine, those are water-soluble substances, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Approximately how long do those take to metabolize in someone's body?
Typical metabolism for a single use of methamphetamine would be up to about 18 hours on detection.
Okay. And so you would basically be able to, forensic fluids would be able to basically detect those, the use of those substances for approximately 18 hours after use?
That's correct, sir, after single use.
Okay. What about for more chronic use?
More chronic use, the window of detection would be a little bit broader. So we'll be able to detect that presence up to about 72 hours.
Okay. In contrast, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol is fat soluble, is that correct?
That is also correct.
So that would be detectable for a much longer period of time.
Uniquely in oral fluid, I'd say 24 to 36 hours after single use.
Okay. Mr. Reed, you're also familiar with drug test results for Mr. Andrew Lane, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Approximately how many samples of or drug screens has forensic fluids processed from Mr. Lane?
Total 18.
Okay. And what was the earliest of those samples that you processed?
The earliest one that we processed was 8/25 of 2022.
And what were the results of that screen?
The result for the toxicology report for 8/25 of 2022 for Mr. Lane was negative.
Great. And the next result, or the next screen?
That sample was collected on 9/16 of 2022. That sample was also negative.
And what about the next results or next screen?
The sample that was collected on 10/25 of 2022, that sample was negative.
Okay. What about the next sample?
I can, the way that my packet is set up, all the negatives we don't necessarily testify to. Those are the 9. And then there are also 9 additional ones that are actually positive.
Okay. What are the dates of the positive screens then?
The very first positive screen would be 8/5 of 2022.
And what was that positive for?
The sample was positive for THC at 1.9 nanograms per mil. This sample was collected on 10/18 of 2022. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 1,637.3 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for amphetamine at 65.2 nanograms per mil. The sample was positive for THC at 5.3 nanograms per mil. This sample was positive for THC at 3.9 nanograms per mil.
Okay. And what was the date of the next positive sample collected from Mr. Lane?
This sample was collected on 12/1 of 2022. This sample was positive for THC at 254.4 nanograms per mil. This sample was collected on 12/13 of 2022. This sample was positive for THC at 0.8 nanograms per mil. This sample was collected on 1/3 of 2023, was positive for THC at 1 nanogram per mil. This sample was collected on 1/24 of 2023. This sample was positive for THC at 1 nanogram per mil. This sample was collected on 2/16 of 2023. This sample was positive for THC at 1 nanogram per mil.
Okay. And by my tally, what was the last positive drug screen collected for Mr. Lane?
This sample was collected on 3/16 of 2023. The sample was positive for methamphetamine at 47.1 nanograms per mil. This sample was positive for amphetamine at 10.7 nanograms per mil. This sample was positive for THC at 0.6 nanograms per mil.
Okay. To your knowledge, does Mr. Lane have any prescriptions that could explain the positive test result for amphetamine?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reed. I have no further questions for you.
Marco, any questions?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Janice, any questions?
No question, Your Honor.
Mr. Schropp, any questions?
Yes, sir, you mentioned Ms. Hamilton didn't have any prescriptions that would create false or positives. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Where do you base that opinion? I mean, do you ask her? Do you run a scan, a test somewhere? How do you find that out?
No, sir. Normally during the collection process, the collector will ask the donor if they have any medications that they're currently on. Excuse me, and they would actually list it on the chain of custody. And in turn, we would actually put that on the toxicology report as well.
Okay, so on this forensics fluid laboratories, all of these individual receipts I have here, they would note it if there was a prescription, correct?
That is also correct, sir. Yes, sir.
And where would that be noted? Top paragraph under oral fluid, where would it be?
Oh, great question. If you look at the toxicology report, right underneath donor ID, there will be a section that would say medications, and that medication would be listed at the top of the toxicology report.
So it'd be under donor name?
It would be under donor ID. So that blank space that's between donor ID and where you start to see the panels, there would be a category there that's saying medications.
Okay. So you don't ask that question, the specimen collector does?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so you don't have any firsthand knowledge whether or not that was, I mean, you're just assuming because that block isn't filled in, she had been, correct?
Yes, sir. Also that it's not listed on the chain of custody under medications.
That's not a part of this document, is it?
If you flip over to the second page, there will be another piece of paper that is the chain of custody. And typically it will be listed in box number 1 where you see donor name and you see underneath that it says medications. It would be listed
Medications,
there.
right.
Yes, sir.
But again, that's been filled out by, for this case, Valerie Hall was the observer. Do we even know who took that specimen?
It would be Valerie. She would be the one to question about the medication not being listed.
Okay. And I note there is a confirmation cutoff, 6.2. Is that the same as a margin of error, or is that just if you can't get above that, it's presumed negative?
That's correct, sir. If you cannot get above that 6 point, yes, sir.
So for instance, on these methamphetamine positive tests, what is the margin of error?
That's not really like a margin of error, because the way that the mass spectrometer works, we're actually looking at the unique molecular composition of that compound. So it's in essence, we're looking at the unique molecular fingerprint of methamphetamine. And so there is nothing else that looks like methamphetamine, only methamphetamine.
But yet you could balance it, you can weigh it somehow.
We can quantify, yes, sir.
Okay, is this volume or weight? A nanogram per milliliter, that's both a volume and a weight, is it not a milliliter?
Yeah, it's a displacement. It's based on a calculation that is based on the surface area of the internal standard versus what the actual drug peak that is detected within the sample.
Okay. So for instance, how long would it take for, actually there's a couple tests here, but 2,400 and more nanograms, and other tests that show as little as 38 nanograms. How long would it take for someone to come down from that 2,400 to 3,800, or to 38, excuse me?
That's a great question. So one of the unique features of oral fluid is what we call the window of detection. How soon after consuming a drug can we detect the presence of it within oral fluid?
Right.
And so we can detect the presence of it a few minutes after consumption up to about 72 hours. And so if we're analyzing a sample where someone just did methamphetamine like an hour or two before they came in to actually take the test, then we should suspect to see very high concentrations. Now, as we get deeper into that window of detection, that concentration will slowly come down as the body is converting methamphetamine into amphetamine so that it can be excreted. So you would start to see those levels go down over time.
How much time in that example?
In that example, it really does depend on, everybody has a different metabolic rate as to which they excrete anything
Metabolism
in their body. So I would just say, for, like I said earlier, a single use for anybody that's not really used to doing it, 18 hours, it should be gone.
Oh, it should be gone totally in 18 hours,
Yes, sir.
undetectable?
Mhm. Yes, sir.
Okay, but wouldn't that differ based on if you had a heavy user continuous and you use for instance, an hour versus if you took one puff off a pipe? I mean, both times you'd be positive within a few moments, but to get down to zero, would that make a difference? The amount
sir, it would.
used and the time you're using?
Yes, sir, it most definitely would. For chronic users, we could literally detect the presence of it within the 72-hour window. And so it would literally probably maintain that same high concentration until we get to the tail end of that 48 to 72-hour window. Then we'll start to see it slowly come down.
And is the sample method a swab, blood, or urine?
It is saliva.
Swab, then.
Yes, sir.
Are all of the swabs after testing retained, maintained, or are they disposed of?
No, sir. All the positives we retain for a year. We store in our freezer.
Okay. Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right. Ms. Hamilton, can you hear me? Did you have any questions for the witness, Mr. Reed?
I do actually have some questions. Hold on. So where the fuck is that? Can you look for the one paper I just drew? Okay, so what is the state cutoff limit?
Say that one more time. I did not catch that.
Is the state cutoff limit?
That doesn't really apply because the cutoff is established by the client. And so you can have whatever cutoff that the client feels.
Okay. Yep.
All right, hold on. Ms. Hamilton,
How does it
I'm
go
gonna
from
let you ask
50
some
to 3 in
questions.
1 week?
Hold on.
Wait. How
Hold
does it go
on.
from 50 to 3?
Ma'am, listen to me. Okay, because you indicated that you wanted to fire Mr. Schraub, even though we're proceeding today, I'm allowing you to ask your own questions. However, you need to let the witness answer the question.
I know, I was just trying to get to the next one. So 50, and then it goes to 3 in 1 week. So how can it go from 50 to 3 for my marijuana in 1 week when it takes over 28 days for it to get out of my system? Like, I feel like
That's actually a misnomer. Marijuana does not last in your system for 28 days.
And I have been continuously dropped by my probation officer since I was 11 years old. So I know my system, and I know that it takes me roughly about 17 days to get out of my system. So how in 1 week does it go from 50 to 3?
Again, it does not stay in your system after a single use of marijuana. It does not stay in your system for 28 days. Now, if you are chronically using,
I am a chronic user. I have my medical marijuana card.
then it will always, ma'am, can I ask a question, please? It will always be in your system. If you're constantly smoking it, it's going to always be detectable within that matrix. So if you're constantly smoking marijuana, it's going to always be detectable within your system.
I'm not worried about that. I want to know about the levels because I feel like from going from 50 to 3 in 1 week, when I know I am a daily user, so my levels should actually be much higher. How does it differ so much? I feel like maybe if you messed up on that part, you may have messed up on another part.
No, ma'am, we're not really looking at the quantitation. We're actually looking at the molecules that we're detecting within that sample. It does not matter if it's 5 or 500. The presence of the marijuana is being detectable within that system. I cannot attest to, nor can I testify to when you used or when you did not use. The only thing I can testify to right now is that that sample was positive for THC at whatever level that you're calling.
And I am asking, how can the levels of THC differ so much so in 1 week? Because from, I believe it was, how can it fluctuate from what week was it? It was like in November, the beginning of November, middle of November. It says it went from 50 to 3 in 1 week. So how for that, it don't make no sense.
Ma'am, I'm just telling you that we detected that level of THC in your system. I cannot attest to you.
Okay, that's fine. Never mind. Okay, never mind. It's okay.
Okay.
Forget it.
Okay.
All set? Mr. Reed, thank you, sir, for your testimony. You're free to go.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
For my next witness, Your Honor, I'd like to call Ann Bleer. And what do you do for a living, Ms. Baylor?
I'm a counselor and a psychologist.
And who's your employer?
West Michigan Psychological Services.
Okay. And what's your educational background?
I have a master's degree in counseling psychology from Western Michigan University.
Just a couple of questions, if I may, word here. Ma'am, you have no specialty certificates, is that correct?
No, I don't have a specialty certificate.
Okay. And you are a master's
Correct.
level? Right. Okay. And that is in the degrees of counseling and what else?
Psychology.
Okay. I have nothing further. Thank you.
All right.
And I guess in light of
Judge,
that, Your Honor, I would have no objection to her being certified in that field.
all right, Ms. Barco, Mr. Denise.
No questions, no objection.
All right, hearing none, the court would recognize Ms. Baylor as an expert in the areas of counseling and psychology.
Ms. Baylor, are you familiar with a Miss Janet Hamilton?
Yes.
How are you familiar with her?
She and I met on October 7th of last year for a psychological evaluation.
And when you say last year, what year are you referring to?
2022.
Okay. And when you say a psychological evaluation, what is that?
It's a process in which we do a clinical interview, we get background information, some history of the case, and then the client does some testing just to assess their personality, see if there's any problems there in regards to it's finding ways to meet their mental health needs.
Okay. And and you performed a clinical interview with Miss Hamilton, is that correct?
Yes.
And you also had her perform a number of psychological tests, is that correct?
Yes.
What psychological tests did you have Miss Hamilton perform?
She took the MMPI and the CAPI and the SASI.
And what are the purposes of those tests? If you could go through them one by one.
Sure. The MMPI is for just general personality. It just assesses a person's response to stress, depression, anxiety, just kind of their general approach to interpersonal relationships, stuff like that. The SASI is specifically for substance abuse, and the CAPI assesses child abuse potential.
Okay. And what were your conclusions based on your interview and Miss Hamilton's performance of those tests?
Well, in the most concise way that I can say it, I would say that what was found that she might not be fully aware of how she contributes to her own problems, and that she lacked adequate coping skills.
Okay. Did you provide Ms. Hamilton with any sort of recommendations for going forward with her mental health treatment?
Yes, I didn't provide them to her directly. They go to the client's caseworker. So I don't know if she got them or not, but yes, there are recommendations at the bottom of the report.
And what were your recommendations for Ms. Hamilton?
To remain sober from drugs or alcohol, participate in individual therapy, maintain appropriate and stable income and housing, attend parenting classes, and participate in in-home services.
Okay. Were there any more specific recommendations for Ms. Hamilton other than to abstain from drugs and alcohol?
Yeah, I guess you could like cater this to a client and depending on the resources that are available, but just to attend Narcotics Anonymous twice a week or other substance abuse counseling. If relapse occurred, I thought a more intensive program might be necessary.
Why did you make that recommendation for Ms. Hamilton?
Well, because of her admission that she used methamphetamine to get her mind off things when she was at her lowest. So that told me that she used it as a coping skill.
Okay. And why were you making the recommendation that Ms. Hamilton participate in individual therapy?
Because she had a high level of psychological distress and to develop insight into her problems.
Okay. Why did you feel it was important that Ms. Hamilton obtain and maintain appropriate and stable income and housing?
Because it didn't appear that she had been that was a primary concern of CPS at the time.
Okay. And why did you recommend that Ms. Hamilton participate in parenting classes?
To develop an understanding of appropriate skills and the needs of her children at the time.
Okay. Since you met with Ms. Hamilton on or about October 7th of 2022, have you met with Ms. Hamilton since?
No, I have not.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Baylor. I have no further questions for you.
Thank you.
Mr. Schropp, any questions?
How was Ms. Hamilton referred to you?
Val.
Through Children's Protective Services. Her caseworker at the time was Val Hall, I believe.
And did you have an interview with Ms. Hall prior to interviewing Ms. Hamilton?
I did not.
Okay. Well, how did you know that one of her needs was stable housing and stable employment?
She
I
told
thought
me
you said
that.
that the department said that.
The department never even helped.
What?
Hamilton,
I'm sorry,
I'm
what?
gonna mute you again. You keep interrupting.
I'll re-ask the question, Ms.
Thank
Baylor. How did you know that she needed stable housing and a job? I thought you said the department told you that's what she needed.
No, she told me that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So there was no initial interview with Ms. Hall or anyone else in the department. It was just name, address, set an appointment, talk to her.
Probably. So in other counties, sometimes I get a little like blurb about just kind of what their concerns are. I don't think that was the case for this one. It's not in my report. Everything in my report is from her herself.
And I think you also mentioned that you thought she should go to NA or some type of an outpatient program. You didn't feel at the time of your evaluation she was to the level where she needed inpatient?
Yes, I think I recommended inpatient if a relapse were to occur.
Okay, and I mean, at the time she was using at the time of your evaluation, correct?
She said that she had last used approximately 3 weeks prior.
Okay, so at that point, she really only qualified for in or outpatient.
I mean, I don't know what she would qualify for. I mean, as far
Well, that
as
was your recommendation, NA.
yeah,
That's an
yeah, at
outpatient
the time
program.
that was my
Very good.
recommendation. Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Barco, any questions for this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Janice, any questions for this witness?
No, Your Honor.
Ms. Hamilton, do you have any questions for this witness? No? All right. Thank you, Ms. Baylor. You're all set.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you please mute me? Can you guys just please mute me? Thank you.
You would have had
You were muted.
For my next witness, if Mr. Bosley is available. And how are you familiar with Miss Janet Hamilton?
I had contact with her a couple of weeks ago. That was my first contact with her.
And what was the nature of your contact with her?
I'd been involved in a fleeing and elude where a vehicle fled from an attempted traffic stop, and it ended up at a house over on 10 Mile Road in Newaygo County. And I had contact with her behind that residence.
Okay. And what occurred during that contact with Miss Hamilton?
What occurred with her? Or
Yeah,
or
what occurred during that contact?
I was having contact with her as she was coming from a vehicle that had, or coming from a vehicle had fled from me, and it ended up behind this residence on 10 Mile Road. As I pulled into the driveway, she was coming out from behind the residence, and as she did so, I had contact with her in the driveway, where I asked, obviously, if she had been the one driving the vehicle. She advised me that she was not driving the vehicle and that she had loaned the car to Andrew Lane.
Okay. Were you able to locate Mr. Lane?
I was not. I had Nuevo County K-9 respond to the location. Nuevo County's K-9 attempted to run a track around the vehicle, to which they were unable to locate any sign of anyone having left the vehicle.
Okay. Were you able to observe anything about the vehicle at that time?
I did. The interior of the vehicle was full of contents, and all of those contacts that were on the interior of the vehicle belonged to Miss Hamilton, including her purse.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bosley. I have no further questions.
You indicated that you found no evidence of Mr. Lane being in the vehicle or around the vehicle.
I did not.
Did it appear that it was his vehicle or her vehicle?
Well, based on the contents of the vehicle, I would say it was hers.
So other than her statement, you had no other evidence that he was involved in the vehicle.
That's correct.
No further questions.
Ms. Marco, any questions?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Strapp, any questions?
Did you arrest her?
I did not arrest her. I couldn't prove she was driving.
Did you ask for a warrant?
I did not.
So no charges pending.
Correct.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Hamilton, any questions? Ms. Hamilton, do you have any questions for the officer? No? All right, I'll read your lips. I think you said no and shook your head. So, all right, sir, you're all set. You're excused.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Yeah. Mr.
For my,
Thompson?
for my next witness, Your Honor, I'd like to call Sarah Netzel if she's available. And is the information that you have protected by HIPAA?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Your Honor, at this time, I would like the court to direct Ms. Nestel to testify regarding any information she may have about the Lane minors, Miss Hamilton, or Mr. Lane.
All right, ma'am, at this time, you need to answer any questions that are asked regarding your interactions with Janet Hamilton, Andrew Lane, Skylar, Shayna, or Sean.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Nestel, are you familiar with Miss Janet Hamilton?
Yes.
How are you familiar with her?
She was assigned to my caseload in the summer of 2022.
Okay. Do you know on what date she was assigned to your caseload?
She was assigned to my caseload on June 21st, 2022.
Okay. And what services were you to provide to Miss Hamilton?
Services were not authorized as we did not have a formal treatment plan. My job typically requires the offering of case management and or therapy services.
Okay. Did you attempt to provide case management and therapy services to Ms. Hamilton?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What did that look like?
There were several attempts to schedule via phone as well as in person. I met her one time in an in-person drop-in visit that was unscheduled. And we had a total of 4 appointments that were scheduled.
Okay. Did Ms. Hamilton attend those scheduled visits?
No.
Okay. What attempts did you make to engage Ms. Hamilton in that service?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
When Ms. Hamilton didn't show up, did you do anything to try to engage her in the therapy services?
Yes, the policy is that we follow up within typically a week of a missed appointment. So after a missed appointment, I call, I send a letter, and if I'm not able to reach them, I sometimes will go actively look for the client.
Did you actively look for Ms. Hamilton?
Yes, I have.
What efforts did you make to actively look for Ms. Hamilton?
I arrived to a home that I was told that she was living at. The people there, I did not identify myself to them. They were told me that she was at her parents' home. I did also look at her parents' home on a separate date, and they were not sure of her whereabouts.
Okay. Since those 4 scheduled, were those 4 scheduled visits supposed to take place in June or July of 2022?
July and August of 2022.
Okay. Since that time, have you had any contact with Ms. Hamilton?
No,
Have you had any contact with Mr. Andrew Lane?
no,
And have you had contact with either Shayna and Skylar or Sean?
no.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Nestel. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Sharp, any questions?
Would your records show any contact attempts by Ms. Hamilton, such as by email, phone, text?
I don't text clients. I don't have a way to text clients, and I don't have a number that's accessible to receive text from clients. My record, if there were attempts, would show what we call non-billable contact. So any phone calls received by a client.
Okay, and then are there any attempts by her to contact you other than showing up at those appointments?
She rescheduled one of the appointments.
Okay, so at least one telephone contact there. Any others?
The original, I don't actually have record of which appointments were scheduled in person. I can go back and look through. I know the first appointment was scheduled when we met in person. When I went to look for her, it was rescheduled via phone. And then one of the appointments was informed by mail through USPS.
Were any of them canceled by her? Where she called or emailed or texted or something?
No,
Were there any other contacts by her to you or attempts to contact you?
not to my knowledge. If you don't mind, I can go back and search the record.
Go ahead. We'll just take a few minutes. Go ahead.
I have a record of a voicemail that I received from Janet, who was asking about trying to schedule appointments. That date was 3 months after her case had closed with myself.
And did you respond?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did anything come of it as far as, for instance, setting another appointment?
I can double check. It would not have been with myself, the appointment, because after someone is discharged, they re-enter services. There was another appointment the following month after she called me with the intake department.
So now we're into September. Do you know if anything come of that? Was an appointment made or held?
So that was not September. I closed her on September 9. I received a voicemail 3 months later in December.
Oh.
And it does appear that there was an appointment in January, but that's not with myself, so I can't speak to the occurrence of that.
So you'd have no further record of it after that point because she's not on your caseload, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Ms. Hamilton, any questions? I guess not. All right, Ms. Nestel, you're all set. Thank you.
Thank you.
For my next witness, Your Honor, I'd like to call Tyler. And who's your employer, Ms. Martin?
Mago County Mental Health.
And what do you do for them?
I am a case manager and clinical therapist.
Okay, so the information that you have is protected by HIPAA. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to direct the court to direct Ms. Martin to testify to any information she may have.
At this time, ma'am, you'd be directed to testify regarding your knowledge about the questions that are asked about Janet Hamilton, Andrew Lane, Shayna Schuyler, and Sean.
Ms. Martin, are you familiar with Ms. Janet Hamilton?
I am.
How are you familiar with her?
Ms. Hamilton is a client of mine. She has been receiving services since about January 2023.
Okay. And what sort of services are you providing to Ms. Hamilton?
We were providing case management services, individual therapy, and med clinic services.
When you say you were, when did those services end?
I saw Janet through a period of January through March pretty routinely. I saw her for 5 appointment times. The last time that we had a scheduled appointment together was March 8th at 4 p.m. that she attended.
Okay. Was Ms. Hamilton successfully discharged from your program?
She has not been discharged yet.
Okay. Why did your services with Ms. Hamilton discontinue in March?
I tried to reach her routinely by phone. I was unable to reach her. We had some appointments that she had rescheduled and a few that she had no-showed. And up until her most recent psychiatric evaluation, I was not sure that she was still interested in services.
Okay. How many appointments did Ms. Hamilton no-show for?
For me as a provider only?
For you as a provider?
3.
Okay. And how many appointments did she reschedule?
One.
And of the appointments that she rescheduled, did she participate in the rescheduled appointment?
There was one that was rescheduled, and I believe I have her marked as a no-show following that.
Okay. What issues were you addressing with Ms. Hamilton through your services?
Primarily, we were addressing her management of anger, emotion dysregulation, and substance use.
Okay. What was being done to address those issues? Could you go through each one specifically?
So in the time that I met with her 5 times. Most of those times she was very dysregulated and challenging to redirect. Therefore, we did not achieve the results that we normally would in, say, a treatment planning process, a case management process. It was really a lot more stabilizing during crisis.
Okay. So during your 5 visits with Ms. Hamilton, most of it focused on stabilizing Ms. Hamilton's mood to the point that you could address these other issues?
That is correct.
Okay. So were you ever able to address these issues during those sessions, or were you still dealing with just kind of getting Miss Hamilton stable?
It would be more of the latter. Yes, it would be more of trying to stabilize emotions during that time.
Okay. To your knowledge, is Ms. Hamilton currently participating in any services with you or your agency?
The last time that she was seen by the agency was for her psychiatric evaluation. That was on May 2nd. I did meet with her briefly. We did not have a scheduled appointment time, but she happened to be near the office, and I met with her the late afternoon of May 11th outside of the building to discuss some stuff with her.
And what did you discuss with Ms. Hamilton at that time?
It was just explained and discussed that I think that my recommendation for her at that juncture was to actively pursue inpatient residential substance use treatment for her substance use.
So as of May 11th, you had reason to believe that Ms. Hamilton was still actively using substances. Is that correct?
When I asked her if she had provided a negative oral drug screen of swab, she stated that she had not recently.
Okay. So why did you make the recommendation that Ms. Hamilton was in need of inpatient substance abuse treatment?
I had asked her if she was still using, and she said on and off, yes, recently. I have observed her behavior to escalate very easily. She becomes dysregulated, and it's very difficult to get her to return to her baseline. And I do believe that some of this is because of the substance use, which I have empathy for, but I think that the best option for her at this time would be for her to attend a more intensive, longer type of treatment program, not just outpatient services through us.
Okay. To your knowledge, is Ms. Hamilton currently engaged in an outpatient treatment program?
To my knowledge, no. Like I had said with us, the last time I had a formal appointment with her was March 8th.
Okay. When you last spoke with Ms. Hamilton in May of 2023, did Ms. Hamilton tell you anything about her current living situation?
She did. She had said that she was homeless and she was staying in the woods. She did have friends that she could go and stay at and shower at, but that she was actively seeking stable housing at that time. That was a major concern for her with attending the rehab center that we called, was that she really wanted to stabilize her housing. That was a priority for her.
Go ahead.
Ms. Martin, have you had any contact with Andrew Lane?
No.
Per your testimony, your last contact with Ms. Hamilton was earlier in May of this year?
The last face-to-face contact I had with Ms. Hamilton was about 4:30 p.m. on Thursday, May 11th.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. I have no further questions for you.
All right.
Mr. Schropp, any questions for Ms. Martin?
Yes, ma'am, you said most of these sessions were consisted of stabilizing during crisis. During any of those meetings, did you make any progress on the goals? I mean, it was a whole meeting just stabilizing.
It was mostly trying to de-escalate her during, times of emotional distress, in trying to discern what was important to her as far as goals. But I'll be honest, I spend a lot of time getting to know my clients and trying to build rapport. So I don't go right out of the gate with treatment plans and really heavy stuff. So no.
Okay. Meeting to meeting, over the course of the 5 meetings, did you see any progress in any of the goals?
There was one meeting and one family team meeting where she showed significantly less reactive behavior, and her mood was a little bit more balanced.
Okay, so some progress.
Yep.
Very good. Thank you. I have nothing further.
Hamilton, any questions? No? All right. Ms. Martin, what was the date of the meeting where you noticed some improvement in Ms. Hamilton's attitude?
March 14th at 1:30 p.m.
And were your meeting with her and the FTM on the same day?
That was technically not an appointment here at CMH. That was during the family team meeting with her foster care worker and myself.
Okay, so that was one incident where she was what, more in control, or how, when you say better, what do you mean by that? Significantly better?
I mean, again, less reactive, not as much dysregulation.
I was high.
Okay.
Okay. That was, Ms. Hamilton just spoke out of turn. I guess indicating that she was maybe intoxicated or high on that date. Were you aware of that?
To my knowledge, up until that point, she had shared with me that she was not using regularly, that she was trying to get clean.
Okay. I guess I don't have any other questions. Any other questions for Ms. Martin?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
No.
All right, you're all set, man. Thank you.
Yes, for my next witness, Your Honor, I'd like to call Ms. Bridget Welch if she's available. And what do you do for them?
Parenting time and family support specialist.
How are you familiar with the Hamilton Lane family?
I provided parenting time with Janet for a couple of months back in 2022, and I currently am providing visitation with the father, Andrew.
Okay. And when did you begin providing parenting time services for Ms. Hamilton?
June of 2022. I believe our first visit was June 23rd.
Okay. And when did your supervision of parenting time with Ms. Hamilton end?
With her third missed visitation on August 4th of 2022.
Okay. How many parenting times were offered to Ms. Hamilton?
There were a total of 13 scheduled visits. 10 of them took place.
Okay. And Ms. Hamilton missed 3 visits, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did that cause your service to be discontinued?
That is correct. If there are 3 missed visits within 30 days, we suspend services or cancel services.
How did, of the 10 parenting times that occur between Ms. Hamilton and her children, how many of those were you present for?
I was present for all 10 of those ones.
Okay. How did those parenting time visits go?
There were some good engagement with the children. She would provide activities such as toys for the children to play with in the sandbox. They would engage with painting and playing on the playground. But then there were instances where there was a lot of like yelling and fighting with the children, or with mom getting upset with some of the children, having to redirect with inappropriate behavior and stuff.
Okay. What sort of inappropriate behavior?
There was an instance where Skylar had ran across the parking lot, and she was screaming at him, yelling at him, and I had yelled at her name twice before she acknowledged me, and I asked her to kind of like try to redirect. She didn't. If I could probably refer to my report just to give example.
Yeah, absolutely. Take your time.
So on July 27th, that visit is when Skylar had took off running. And Janet, let's see, he took off running into the parking lot, ran away from Janet, and she chased after him. She started yelling and cursing at him, and I had to say her name twice before she acknowledged me. And I started to explain to Janet how yelling and cursing at Skylar was inappropriate, but then she shifted her yelling and cursing at myself.
Did you, is part of your role as a family supportive services worker to provide Ms. Hamilton with some parenting skills?
That is correct.
Did you work with Ms. Hamilton on parenting skills?
There were two meetings where we were supposed to meet up prior to our visitation, our scheduled visitation. Both times Janet did not show up.
Okay. Were you able to see Ms. Hamilton utilize any of the parenting skills that you may have taught her during the 10 visits that occurred?
She would try with the redirection. With Shayna specifically on the slide, she wanted to go down a slide. And she told her she could go down the slide, but then she needed help with cleaning up. And Shayna persisted. She tried to go down the slide again. She counted to 3. Shayna still didn't acknowledge her. So then she turned right back to pleading with her, please get off the slide, come help us. So she did attempt to, but she didn't follow through with it.
Okay. During the 10 visits that occurred, did you see any dramatic improvement in Ms. Hamilton's parenting skills?
No.
Okay. Did Ms. Hamilton successfully complete your program?
No.
Okay. You mentioned earlier in your testimony that you also supervised parenting time with Mr. Lane. Is that correct?
That is correct. I've done 2 visits with him so far.
When did your supervision of those parenting times with Mr. Lane begin?
May 2nd was my first visit with him.
Okay. And has he, since that you began supervising Mr. Lane's visits, has he missed any visits?
He has not, no. Not
Okay.
with me.
And how have those parenting times gone?
They're pretty, Andrew does do well with taking direction in my suggestions. He follows through with what I suggest. That the kids do still run out of the rooms, behavior issues with cussing during visitation and such. But like I said, Andrew does do well with taking suggestion from myself.
Okay. Are you actively working with Mr. Lane on parenting skills?
Yes, well, in the moment, I guess, during visitation, I have been giving suggestions, but I've only done 2 visits with him thus far.
Has Mr. Lane been able to apply any of those suggestions that you've given him?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think Mr. Lane's parenting skills have improved in those 2 visits, or is it too soon to tell?
It would too soon to tell.
Okay. How do Mr. Lane's children respond to him during parenting times?
They all engage pretty well. They talk amongst each other. Behaviors with the children sometimes can get escalated with children exiting the rooms. But when they are engaging, Andrew does well with engaging with them as a whole.
When you say the children exit the rooms, what do you mean by that?
So Sean on May 9th had just like grabbed his, or walked to the door, opened the door, and ran out of the room. And the referring worker was standing right there, so she was able to stop him. But after that, he was trying to get me to move away from the door so he could try to escape again, by asking me to pick up toys that were fairly easy to pick up. And he was saying he wasn't able to pick it up, redirecting me and wanting me to reach for something off of a shelf that would get me away from the door so that he could try to get out.
Okay. Is there any explanation for why Shane wants to get out of the room?
No, he didn't give any explanation to me.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Welch. I have no further questions.
Ms. Barco, any questions?
No.
Mr. Janice, any questions?
Yes, I do. Could I ask what prompted the starting of the parenting time with Andrew on the 2nd of May?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of that question?
What was the?
He basically just wants to ask you something, but you have one question in there. Yeah, because you fucking sleep most of the time. You don't think shit.
It's not your turn, ma'am. Jeez. Mr. Janice, go ahead.
What initiated the parenting time with Andrew starting on May 2nd?
I had some availability within my schedule, and he was next on our wait list.
All right, so you're waiting for him to come up on your list. He complied then?
Correct, yes.
And you're scheduling on a regular basis?
Correct, yes.
And was his behavior appropriate with the children?
I have not observed anything that was inappropriate between him and the children thus far.
And you indicated that you did not have enough time to evaluate any changes in the activities, right?
That's correct.
I have no further questions.
Ms. Barco, did I ask you if you had any questions?
You did ask me and I do not have any.
Oh, all right, sorry. Mr. Schropp, any questions?
Yes, please. So ma'am, actually, with only 2 sessions and Ms. Hamilton didn't make them, she didn't really receive any parenting classes or direction from you, correct?
Not any paper form education. A lot of it was redirection and trying to assess in the moment kind of education.
And during the course of the visits that you did supervise, did you see her using any of those skills or the redirection or anything that you suggested?
With that one incident with Shayna on the slide would be the only thing off the top of my mind that I could say that she attempted but was unsuccessful with following through with it.
Okay, so the best of your knowledge, she didn't receive any other actual formal classes or other than the redirection during the visit?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Ms. Hamilton, do you have any questions for Ms. Welch? She shook her head no. Okay, thank you, Ms. Welch. I guess you're all set.
Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Salasina?
Yes, for my next witness, I'd like to call Shay Baumgartner. And what do you do for them?
At the time of this case, I was the CPS investigator.
Okay. And that was for the Hamilton Lane family, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. At the time of your investigation, what barriers were you able to assess barriers for the family?
Yes.
Okay. What were the barriers to reunification for Andrew Lane at the time of your investigation?
At the time, Andrew was incarcerated at the Oceana County Jail and pending criminal charges.
Okay. Were there other barriers for him as well?
There were also concerns that of his criminal history. He has a history of domestic violence and substance use.
Okay. And what about Miss Hamilton? What were her barriers at that time?
At that time, the concerns were her housing stability. She was residing with her parents, and her dad wanted her and the children to leave the home and even threatened to turn off the power to have the children leave. There were ongoing verbal disputes in the home between Janet and her parents with the children present. There were concerns of substance use and substances being available to the children. Janet's behavior and ongoing concerns that she wasn't meeting the children's needs, including educational needs and health needs.
Okay. And have you had contact with the family since your investigation ended?
I have seen them in passing, but I have not had any direct involvement.
And when did your investigation end, Ms. Baumgartner?
I filed the petition in this case, and the removal occurred on 5/20 of 2022. And I would say my involvement ended shortly after that.
Okay. Why at that point in time did you believe that the children were at risk and in need of protection?
Janet had been referred to Families Together Building Solutions to assist with the barriers, including the substance use and meeting the children's needs. We had a discussion with her that FTBS, Families Together Building Solutions, did not feel as though their program could adequately meet her needs. And we discussed Families First with her. She refused to participate with Families First. She did ultimately say she would participate if the state was going to petition to remove the kids. So I did make a referral for that. When she found out, she threatened to blow my brains out with a shotgun if I ever step back on her property. Families Together Building Solutions would no longer be able to go out to the home because it was a safety hazard. And there were just concerns of her ongoing emotional stability, substance use, and not meeting the children's needs.
You're denying the fact that I asked you for help when my parents were physically assaulting me and then physically assaulting my children?
Give you a chance to speak when it's your turn, Ms. Hamilton. You can ask questions. I'll give you a chance to testify. You're muted at this point.
What were you, during the course of your investigation, able to offer the family any services?
Prior to petitioning for removal and throughout the family's involvement with Children's Protective Services over the years, the family had been provided with, or at least referred to Families First, psychological assessments, West Michigan Community Mental Health Case Management Services, infant mental health.
I hate to interrupt. I'm going to go off the record for just a minute. Sir, can you step out now? Yes, sir. All right.
What services were offered to the family prior to removal?
Prior to removal, the family or Janet Hamilton was provided with or referred to Families First, psychological assessments, a West Michigan Community Mental Health Case Management Services, infant mental health, Oceana Home Partnership and Supportive Housing Program, an early on referral, random oral drug screening, safety planning, CPS investigations and ongoing monitoring, Families Together Building Solutions, provided a lockbox, a resource guide, Arbor Circle nurturing, parent handouts, handouts on the effects of substance abuse on behavior and parenting, Medicaid and food assistance. Andrew Lane was provided with CPS investigations and ongoing monitoring, safety planning, psychological evaluation, substance abuse evaluation through Choices West, therapy with Services of Hope, probation services and monitoring, and community mental health.
Okay. Were those services complied with by the family?
That was throughout the several years the family had involvement with the department. During the investigation, Janet was referred to Families Together Building Solutions, and it covered from April 21st of 2022 to 5/20 of 22. And there were concerns that the service had to be discontinued because of the worker safety hazard, as well as the children being removed from her care.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Baumgartner. I have no further questions.
Mr. Schropp, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Janice, any questions?
No question, Your Honor.
Ms. Barco, any questions?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Baumgartner. You're all set.
For my next witness, Your Honor, I'd like to call Ms. Valerie Hall. When did you begin working with the family?
I began working with the family shortly after removal. So I believe the children were removed on 5/20 of 2022. And I began working with them from that point.
Okay. At the time you began your case, were you able to assess the barriers to reunification for Ms. Janet Hamilton?
Yes.
And what were those barriers to reunification?
Housing, so physical neglect for housing, food, transportation, medical care, educational care for the children, continued involvement with criminal activity, failure by Ms. Hamilton to properly accept and engage and attend in services, substance use, mental health.
Okay. Were you able to provide Ms. Hamilton with services designed to overcome those barriers to reunification?
Yes.
What were the services offered to Ms. Hamilton?
So we offered Ms. Hamilton case management, family supportive services, random drug screenings, supervised parenting time, transportation assistance, gas cards, a referral to True North Community Services and MISHDA for housing services, psychological evaluation, substance abuse assessment, referral to parenting classes, individual counseling services through CMH, family team meetings, a referral to WISE, phone and phone cards, multiple phones, and trauma assessments for all of her minor children.
Okay. Did Ms. Hamilton comply with and benefit from those services?
Minimally, but no benefit.
Okay. Why do you say that?
So throughout the case, we would attempt to give Ms. Hamilton services, and she would either not follow through with the services, not attend appointments, or she would participate, for example, with drug screens, but continue to test positive for methamphetamine.
Okay. Do you believe that the conditions that led to adjudication continue to exist?
Yes.
Why is that?
Ms. Hamilton continues to struggle to regulate herself emotionally. Ms. Hamilton continues to utilize illegal substances such as methamphetamine. Ms. Hamilton has not been able to have stable housing throughout this case. She reported to me last week, Monday, that she is literally homeless, living in the woods in her vehicle. She continues to demonstrate a pattern of instability, things of that nature.
I believe that those conditions will continue to exist, even if Ms. Hamilton's given additional time to overcome those barriers.
Yes.
Why is that?
So Ms. Hamilton has demonstrated some pretty severe mental health concerns, communication issues with the department, just a lack of understanding of her needs. She frequently demonstrates an inability to communicate appropriately without dishonest, aggressive, threatening, or inappropriate behavior towards staff members. She continues to be homeless. She continues to refuse inpatient rehabilitation services and other services offered to assist her.
Okay. Is there, what would be the risk of harm if the children were to be returned to the home of Miss Hamilton at this time?
So the children wouldn't have a home to return to as she's literally homeless. There would also be the risk of physical and verbal abuse towards the children by Miss Hamilton, as demonstrated in past protective services cases, as well as supervised visits. Miss Hamilton continues to engage in substance abuse, which would put her children at risk for inappropriate supervision and just instability for her children.
Okay. When you began your case, what were Andrew Lane's barriers to reunification with his children?
So Mr. Lane has had barriers for his mental health, substance abuse, housing, and criminal behavior.
Okay. Did you provide Mr. Lane with services designed to help him overcome those barriers to reunification?
Yes.
What were the services provided to Mr. Lane?
Mr. Lane was provided with a psychological evaluation, random drug screening, substance abuse assessment through Arbor Circle, referral to family supportive services, and a couple of visits with family supportive services for parenting skills. He was provided with gas cards, transportation assistance. He was provided a referral to Wedgwood for treatment. He was referred to community mental health services for treatment. And I believe that's all I can think of right now.
Mr. Lane comply with and benefit from those services?
Minimally.
Why do you say that?
Mr. Lane did complete his psychological evaluation and his substance abuse assessment. However, he was very withholding in the information that he provided in those assessments. And for example, with the substance abuse assessment, he reported that he hadn't used illegal substances in quite some time, despite his drug screens showing the opposite. Mr. Lane also did start some services through community mental health, but his engagement was extremely minimal, according to what they reported to me. I think he only, by his own admission, attended one appointment with community mental health. He also was attempting to get into Wedgwood services. However, because of his continued criminal and homelessness, he recently found himself homeless again. His truck was impounded, I believe, a few days ago, and he lost the cell phone in that truck that was provided to him last week. So he's been unable to follow through on services of that nature. And that continues to be a pattern where we provide services and then services are no longer able to be utilized later on because they get lost due to criminal behavior.
Okay. Do you believe that the conditions that led to Mr. Lane's adjudication continue to exist?
Yes.
Why is that?
So as I was just testifying to a minute ago, he has had continued contact with law enforcement throughout his case since he was released. He was initially released, I believe, in September of 2022, and then put back in jail in October, and then re-released again. He's been out of jail for the majority of that time, although I do believe he spent a weekend in jail somewhere in there. He continues to drive without a license, which puts him at risk to be pulled over and put in jail. He continues to use THC or marijuana, which is against the rules of his probation. He continues to have housing instability. He continues to have concerns for substance abuse.
Okay. Do you believe that there's a reasonable likelihood that these conditions can be rectified within a reasonable time if Mr. Lane's given more time to comply with services?
I don't.
Why is that?
Again, it's just that continued pattern. I would say that Mr. Lane is today in a further behind position than he started when he was released from jail. He was recently evicted from the home he was staying in. He was assaulted in that home because he refused to leave, and the homeowners assaulted him. He refused a drug screen on May 4th of 2023, and he reported that he had been with Ms. Hamilton and used her I don't recall if it was a pipe or bong or how he worded that, but he had used Miss Hamilton's paraphernalia and felt that there may have been methamphetamine residue in that when he'd used marijuana with her. So he refused a drug screen, indicating it would probably be positive for methamphetamine on the 4th. So he continues to struggle with all of those concerns.
Okay. Do you believe that there's a risk of harm if the children are returned to Mr. Lane at this time?
Yes.
What harm do you feel the children would be subjected to if they were to be returned to Mr. Lane?
So Mr. Lane doesn't have a safe or stable home for the children to return to. Mr. Lane is at risk himself for going back to jail with his continued criminal activities. Mr. Lane continues to have issues with substance abuse that could impact his ability to appropriately supervise the children. And while Mr. Lane does well in parenting times, it is apparent that he does get frustrated and struggle with their behaviors at times. So there's concern that while he's not abusive towards the children, he also would not be able to adequately manage their intensive needs.
Okay. At this time, do you believe that there's any additional services that could be offered to either parent to help them overcome the barriers to reunification?
I believe we've offered them all of the services that are available.
Okay. Have you created parent agency treatment plans and case service plans for both parents?
I have.
Have you reviewed those plans with them?
I have.
Okay. Are the parents in agreement with those plans?
I believe they have written that they were for the most part. I don't believe I was able to go over the most recent one with Miss Hamilton due to difficulty contacting her, but other than that, yes.
Okay. You collected the drug screen samples from Miss Hamilton, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did Miss Hamilton inform you of any medications that she was taking?
Not at the time that I provided her with drug screens, no.
Okay. And you also filed the termination of parental rights petition in this case, is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you believe that termination of parental rights is in the best interest of the children?
I do.
Why?
Both Miss Hamilton and Mr. Lane are extremely unstable and are not able to meet their own needs, let alone the needs of their children. All 3 children have extensive needs for their mental health. All 3 children came into care significantly behind, both developmentally with their education and also just like regular life skills that you would expect to see at their ages. They've had to be catching up to their peers for this entire past year. So things like toileting and dressing themselves and regular bathing, healthy eating habits, all of those things have had to be taught to the children very intentionally. And I just don't believe that with the barriers the parents are facing, that they would be able to provide the children the stability and care that they require.
Do you think we're any closer to reunifying the family now than when the children were removed in May of 2022?
No.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. I have no further questions.
Ms. Marco, any questions?
For clarification purposes, how did visits start up again with Mr. Lane, like within the last month? How did that come about?
So his visits were never ended.
Okay.
So he had missed quite a few visits in, I believe, the month of February. There were a few that he had missed where he had no call, no showed, or canceled, or not confirmed. And then there was a number that also got missed due to inclement weather.
So how many visits has he had in the last, say, 2 months?
So typically Mr. Lane gets 2 visits per week for an hour. So we've been doing Tuesdays and Thursdays. There was a couple weeks ago, he missed both days in the week. And that was reported that the kids' behaviors actually were improved during that time when they weren't having visits. I know that Skylar in particular really struggles with the visits. He tends to try to run away and hide during the visits. He's given various reasons that kind of changed between why he doesn't want to go, ranging from he's upset that he can see dad but not mom to everyone's mean to him in the visits and he doesn't feel like he wants to be there. So.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Janice, any questions?
Yes, Your Honor. What I'm curious about, the prior witness indicated that he had certain parenting scheduled parenting times with only 2 currently scheduled, which he's maintained. What were these scheduled in February too?
Are you asking if he had visits scheduled in February as well?
Right.
Yeah, so we had several. The visit schedules never changed Tuesdays and Thursdays unless there was like an appointment for the children that we had to adjust around. A lot of the visits missed in, I believe, like January, February time period were due to Mr. Lane not calling or showing up, not confirming the visits ahead of time, or canceling the visits. And then there was a number of visits as well that were canceled, but provided makeup time, but canceled due to inclement weather. So the roads were very icy and the schools canceled. So in those events, we would typically reschedule or have them be held virtually.
You know, talking about the visits, does he act appropriately with the children during the supervised visits?
So he doesn't act inappropriately with the children. He isn't, screaming at them or cussing at them or anything I would label as abusive. He does struggle to manage the children's behaviors when they're acting out, and could use a lot more support in that area. For example, Skylar frequently will run out of the room. The children will yell at each other. They'll tackle each other. Andrew has done attempts in the past to intervene with those. And like Bridget had testified to earlier, we do provide him with feedback during those visits, and we see him attempt to use those, though he doesn't use them consistently all of the time yet. But the larger issue at hand for Mr. Lane is that he just is not able to provide the stable, safe environment the children need.
But he does not provides supervision for the children appropriately when they have visits, right?
I'm sorry, could you restate that? I didn't hear everything you said.
Does he handle the children appropriately when he has supervised visits?
So he doesn't act inappropriately towards the children, but he doesn't intervene with the children in an effective way during the parenting times when they have behavioral issues.
Would he benefit from additional services to help him handle that situation?
I mean, potentially, but at this time, we've had so many visits and we've had so much time for him to rectify the other barriers that's more of why we're here than just his parenting skills themselves.
No further questions.
Mr. Schott?
Yes. When you took the tests for Ms. Hamilton, do you specifically recall asking her if she was on any prescriptions for each of those tests?
So when I provide a drug screen, I do the same routine each time. And that does include when we get to the line on the drug screen saying any medications I should be aware of. And if they say something, I will put something down.
So that's an automatic part of your routine?
Yes.
Okay, so you're sure you answer that then on each of these tests?
Yeah, I mean, I do recall, I don't know which date she sent it. There was one time where she sent me a prescription bottle, very briefly flashed it at me in a video on Facebook Messenger. But I believe she stated that was like an antibiotic or something. And that's the only time she's ever mentioned a prescription to me.
Okay.
And
the last time we had a review, the last time we had a review, I remember she had told me that she did have a house. And I think she mentioned it, I'm not sure online or not, but we spoke. And I told her, make sure you tell Ms. Hall the address. In the past couple months, has she reported to you a home that she had acquired?
So I've requested from Ms. Hamilton multiple times for her to verify some type of lease or mail or something to verify that she had a stable address. She did provide me with the Van Wagner address in Grant. However, last week, Monday, when we had a family team meeting virtually, Ms. Hamilton advised that the homeowner no longer was allowing them to stay there and that she was homeless in the woods.
Oh, that was last week?
Last week, Monday, yes.
Oh, okay. And then also, as far as parenting classes, Ms. Welch testified that she had offered two that Ms. Hamilton didn't make. Was she offered any other resource, any other place she could go for parenting classes other than those two with Ms. Welch?
Yes. So we also offered Ms. Hamilton online parenting classes, and I obtained and purchased a gift card for her so that she could come into the office and sign up with a Visa gift card for these classes. However, Ms. Hamilton canceled all of her appointments with me and did not respond. So we ended up not being able to sign her up for that class. And then she reported that she signed herself up for that class, but then provided me no verification. She was also provided with handouts from 123 Magic from the book, as well as worksheets from 123 Magic that I never received back or got notification that she had completed. And I've also given her information for MSU's online parenting classes that are occasionally offered as well.
As far as you know, she hasn't participated in any of those?
Correct.
Okay, right. I have nothing further.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You're all set. Mr. Salasina, anything else?
I have no additional witnesses. However, I did provide the court with a number of certified conviction records for Mr. Andrew Lane. They've been provided to counsel in advance of today's hearing. At this point in time, Your Honor, I'd like to have those, because they are self-authenticated, admitted into the court record as evidence.
All right, those records will be reviewed then, and marked or admitted as exhibits. Other than that, Mr. Salasina, any other evidence?
No, Your Honor, at this time, we rest.
Ms. Marco, any evidence you want to present?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Schroff, any evidence you want to present?
Well, I had assumed Ms. Hamilton was going to testify, but is she no longer on Zoom? She stayed off?
She stayed off.
All right, I guess with that, no, that I have nothing further. No evidence.
Mr. Janice, any evidence you want to present?
Prior to that, Your Honor, could I ask that I be given a moment with my client in a breakout room or basically not very breakout room? Mr. Lane, you're a party to this action?
You're a party to this action?
Yes.
No, we've heard many negative comments made about your ability to do things. Could you please explain to the court what you've done and what you hope to accomplish it, both as your personal life and as the other activities that they say you don't provide supervision for?
I have done multiple things. I've done the psych evaluation, I've done substance abuse evaluation, but they find that not acceptable to their standards, even though I have completed it. I went to CMH here in White Cloud. White Cloud CMH told me that I can't be accepted there because I'm not a resident here. So I went to Wedgwood. I signed up through Wedgwood. I was assaulted in my residence in my bed when I was sleeping at 7 in the morning. They took my phone that morning, so I could not go to or make the phone call to Wedgwood the following Monday. I've done multiple things that is just apparently not enough for this court. I don't know.
But you attempted to take part in all the activities that they wish you take in counseling and things like that, right?
Yes, I've even wrote Valerie Hall stating that I would like more involvement. If there's more classes and more things that I can do in the meantime from the last court date that we had, that I would be more than willing to go through that. And she told me no, whatever I needed to do was in my parental treatment packet thing.
You offered to do whatever they want you to do to cover the
Yes.
bases, right?
Yes,
And you still are very interested in love your children, is that right?
very much so. I'm signed up for True North, and since reunification is not the goal at this time, True North is kind of waiting to get a paper saying that reunification is the goal, and they'll help me with a 4-bedroom house or apartment with 18 months paid rent. And if not, then they'll just help me with a single bedroom. So I'm kind of in limbo waiting for housing from the court.
But you're taking steps to arrange it if available.
Yes, I'm signed up through them and waiting to get paperwork through, I guess. Reunification is either the goal or not the goal.
So you wish the goal to be changed to reunification, correct?
Very much so.
What is your
And when
relationship
they
with
say-
the mother of the children?
There's not none. And when they say that I have a hard time with my kids, I see that when there's 3 or 4 or 5 of them having a hard time with my kids, and I'm just one person, I think that I have a very much better understanding and capabilities than them. When 4 or 5 of them can't really handle them, but I'm just me, one single person, and I handle them pretty well without cussing and swearing, getting irate, or needing to take a break at all.
You can provide for your children, right?
Yes,
And you wish to continue to do so, right?
I do.
You're willing to take part in any program that they wish you to take part in,
And you know,
including any further psychological evaluations or anything?
yes, I'll do them all. Anything they want done, I will do.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Salasina, any questions for Mr. Lane?
Yes, Mr. Lane, you said in your testimony that you signed up for True North to look for housing. Do you currently have housing?
I am currently staying down here at the hotel. I'm waiting. True North is waiting for what the goal is, reunification, so I can get a 4-bedroom house or apartment for the kids and myself. Without the paperwork, they cannot approve the housing for that.
Okay. And you said that at one point you were assaulted and they took your phone so you couldn't call Wedgwood. When did that assault occur?
I do not recall the current date. Maybe Valerie does, or
Okay.
It was on a Sunday morning.
Were you provided with another phone after that assault occurred?
I was.
Were you able to call Wedgwood then?
I was not. I've only had the phone for 3 days before I just got the vehicle impounded due to not being homeless and waiting to find out I need housing. So I was waiting for housing and I was parked in the wrong spot and they towed my vehicle. I wasn't even in the vehicle when I got another ticket.
Okay. Do you have a driver's license currently?
No, sir.
Okay. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Schropp, any questions?
No, thank you.
Ms. Marco, any questions?
No, Your Honor.
Sir, you're currently on probation or parole?
Yes, Your Honor.
Which one?
Probation, which is up in June. All fines are paid, everything's completed. It's just waiting for the last report date, which is in June.
All right, what's the underlying offense for your probation?
Possession of methamphetamine.
Is that probation in this county or a different county?
Oceana.
Oceana. And you were incarcerated, you were in jail in the Oceana County Jail when the case was filed about a year ago?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, was that for the same charge?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Have you, do you have any other offenses pending at this point?
I got 2 driving without licenses
What county are those pending?
here. Yes.
And so those are in district court. What's the next hearing set for?
May 31st at 10:10.
The trial, pre-trial, sentencing?
Sentencing.
Sentencing. So did you plead guilty or did you have a trial or what?
Yeah, I had trial. I'm still guilty to him.
You pled guilty?
Yes,
All right.
to the one.
2 counts. They dropped 1 if you pled to 1?
Yes.
Okay. And True North will help you get a 1-bedroom place under the current situation or a 4-bedroom place if the goal were changed to reunification?
Yes.
All right. So are you going to pursue the 1-bedroom place at this point?
That's what it is.
I mean, they'll help you get a place on your own regardless of this case, it sounds like, right? Okay. Because, I don't know what I'm gonna do today, but,
I really want nothing more than have my kids back.
okay, and I appreciate that. But I gotta go over a lot of stuff, all my notes and the pleadings in the case and things like that. I don't take these lightly. I don't usually, unless it's crystal clear, just go right into a decision. Sometimes I do because there's really no question, but maybe with Janet there is or isn't, but with you it's a little less clear, I guess. And the kids weren't removed from you. What was your custodial situation with Janet back before you went to jail a year ago?
We were not together. The only reason that we got together was she said that she had cancer and that she wanted to reconcile our differences, and she drove to the spots where we got pulled over and all this. The incident happened where I even went to jail, but that wasn't even mine to go to jail with.
It wasn't your meth?
No, which is in the original first report.
So you weren't together as a family at that point, and the kids were living with her at that point?
Yes.
Where were you living then?
I had a house in Muskegon.
Okay. What happened to that house?
I had 2 warrants prior to that, and I didn't have the income to keep on proceeding to go with it, keep it from going back.
Was it a rental or did you own it or what?
I bought it from my mom. It was my dad's house when he died.
So who owns it now? Like your mom or a bank?
My mom took it back, yes.
Oh.
It was in my dad's name that I was going to get.
And so it looks like you've had a pretty steady stream of negative drug tests. And I mean, on probation, you shouldn't be using THC, but I guess the bottom line is it's not illegal per se at this point. But as far as meth goes, you had a couple relapses, it looks like, in the last year. Other than that, you're pretty staying away from that pretty well?
Yes.
Okay. Now, some services have been offered to address some other stuff, like the homelessness, I guess, and substance abuse, I guess, counseling and things. Didn't really comply with a lot of that, but
I tried to. Like I said, I went to CMH, and CMH, I had the 1 appointment there, and they got a hold of her afterwards and said that I was able to go back there, even though they told me I wasn't a resident here, so I wasn't able to go back there. So I didn't proceed on, keep on going to CMH. And I told Valerie, if there's some other place I can go to, or that you would like me to go to, I'm more than willing to go there. And she recommended Wedgwood. And I set up appointments with Wedgwood, and then the assault happened, and I wasn't able to comply with going to Wedgwood.
you were assaulted at Wedgwood or somewhere else?
At my own residence.
Oh, you're assaulted at your house. Okay. And something happened to your phone?
Yes, they took the phone that morning.
People that assaulted you did?
Yes,
Oh, did that ever get reported to the police?
I did.
Oh, did they ever get your phone back?
They didn't.
Did they ever find the people that assaulted you?
They already told me the other day that they were looking for me so that way I could be the witness, so I'm assuming so.
Oh, is that in this county or a different?
Oceana,
That was in Oceana.
which I've also done online parenting classes. And like I said, I've asked Valerie if there's anything more I can do to show the courts or herself that I am willing to comply and complete anything that you guys would recommend.
Okay. What was your, so you and Janet, were you ever married?
No.
Okay. So, when she lived here and you lived in your house in Muskegon, who did the kids live with?
They stay with her.
Okay. Did you have a visitation schedule? Did you see them on occasion?
She would not. It was a control thing for her. She knows the only thing I wanted was my kids. As long as that she could keep my kids away from her, that I'd be in her control, basically.
All right. Did you guys ever live together, you and Janet?
We lived together, yes.
For how long?
It was on and off for the last 10 years.
Okay. When was the last time you guys lived together?
The last time we lived together, I mean, we stayed together, but lived together was in Muskegon.
So in the same house?
Yes,
All right. She moved out of there at some point?
yes.
When did she move out?
It was on March 6th,
22?
2020,
2020.
2021.
So right around COVID time?
Yes,
Okay. And then she moved up here to Nuevo County?
I guess so.
You stayed down there. So that was 2 years before the case got filed. Did you have any visitation with the kids then?
I didn't, and that was part of the reason why that I was willing to even have the reconciliation that she wanted to have when she thought everything that happens by telling me that she had cancer, I'd be more forgiving. And all I wanted to do was see my kids, and that was it. I didn't really cared that much about the cancer, or whatever she was going on about. Just want to see my kids. It destroyed me not seeing them.
I mean, there was an open case in Oceana, I think, right? Like a child support case or something?
That was 2016 or 17 or something. She went and did that, and it was only open for 3 months, and it was closed.
It's closed, it's still open.
No.
You're not ordered to pay support or anything?
Me and her went up there and had that closed.
It says you're ordered to pay $445 a month. Maybe that's the foster care. I guess that's the foster care. You still have an arrears, $4,700 arrears.
I was not even aware of that, sir.
All right. Anything else you want me to consider?
Other than I'm not the person that seems to be in their light of view or on paper. I just want my kids back, and I want to do right.
Any other questions for Mr. Lane?
No further questions.
I have one, Your Honor.
Yep.
Mr. Lane, were you ever arrested after the arrest for the possession of methamphetamine in October of 2022, but before the driving offenses?
Yes,
What was that for?
it was for violation of probation.
Okay. And how did you violate probation in that instance?
I was concerned about Janet's well-being since a few days prior to this instance, before I got arrested, that she had a couple needle marks on her arms, and she said that the people that was around almost killed her. And I was just very concerned at the time when I called 911 and made a threatening gesture that if they didn't hurry up there and show up there, that something was going to happen.
Any other times that you were arrested since then?
When I called the first time that 2 people showed up at my residence there on Skills, I called the cops because they come kicking the doors and woke me up. They kicked me in the ribs, and I got up. And apparently I was just here the week before, and I put money on my fines, but it wasn't paid off in time, I guess. So they put me in jail for that, which I posted bond that hour and was released, and that was the only time.
Were you arrested for breaking into a neighbor's building?
No.
Okay. Within the past month, did Valerie Hall offer you a drug screen?
Yes.
Did you refuse to take that drug screen?
Yes. But I
Why?
took 2 other ones. I took 2 other ones in the meantime, one before and one afterwards.
Why did you refuse that drug screen?
I refused to take that one because of the current situation of that. I was around Janet and trying to benefit her to make sure she was taken care of, because I know she doesn't have much or have many people or have people that understand her the way I do, since we spent so much time around each other. And she asked me if I wanted to smoke weed if I wanted to hit. That's what she asked. You want to hit? And I said, sure. She says, you know, there's probably something in there, maybe. I said, it's just weed, right? She said, as far as I know. And then I hit it. And then I had to go see my kids. And she asked me to take a drug test. And I said, I'd prefer not to. And she said, I understand. And I took one this Tuesday. It should be clean.
I have no further questions, Mr. Lane.
All right, anything else for this witness?
No.
No. All right, you're all set, sir. Mr. Janice, anything else to present?
No, nothing else to present, Your Honor.
Any other evidence?
No.
No.
All right, Mr. Celestino, any final comments?
Yes, Your Honor. Pursuant to MCL 712A.19B3, the court may terminate a parent's parental rights to a child if the court finds by clear and convincing evidence one or more of the following. Under subsection C and then subsection I, the parent was a respondent in a proceeding brought under this chapter 182 or more days have elapsed since the issuance of an initial dispositional order, and the court, by clear and convincing evidence, finds either of the following. The conditions that led to adjudication continue to exist, and there's no reasonable likelihood the conditions will be rectified within a reasonable time considering the child's age. In this case, Your Honor, for both Mr. Lane and Ms. Hamilton, more than 182 days have elapsed since the issuance of the initial dispositional order. The barriers still continue to exist. There are still problems with housing. There's still problems with mental health and substance abuse and ongoing criminality. Despite the numerous efforts offered by the department for both parents, it appears that these conditions continue to exist, despite this case being open for over a year now. The family had been offered services even prior to adjudication, and still we have these problems. You heard both Ms. Baumgartner and Ms. Hall testify to the numerous services offered to the family. You've heard from several of the service providers themselves about the minimal level of compliance with services, how there may be some level of benefit, but again, minimal benefit. Additionally, Your Honor, the court can terminate a parent's parental rights under subsection J of the previously mentioned statute, that there's a reasonable likelihood based on the conduct or capacity of a child's parent that the child will be harmed if he or she is returned to the home of the parent. I think that's true in this case, based simply on the fact that the conditions that led to the children being removed from the home of both parents continue to exist. And I realize that the children were actually removed from one parent, but still the conditions that made the children's residence with either parent appropriate, again, for the reasons already stated on the record, continue to exist. Once you find a grounds for termination exists under MCL 712A.19B, the court then needs to turn to the best interest of the children and look for that based on a preponderance of the evidence on the entire record. In this case, again, we would argue that termination of parental rights is in the best interest of the children because at this point, neither parent has a home, neither parent has demonstrated an ability to be able to provide for and care for these children. The parents still are struggling with substance abuse, mental health. And Your Honor, the children also have needs, as testified to by Ms. Hall, that makes managing their behaviors difficult. Per the testimony of both Ms. Hall and Ms. Welch, the parents struggle to some extent, a greater degree for Ms. Hamilton than Mr. Lane, admittedly. But with parenting those children, I believe it was testified to by both Ms. Welch and Ms. Hall that both parents could benefit or could have benefited from increased parenting classes or services, which to date, over a year into this case, the parents simply have not either complied with or benefited from those services that have been previously offered. We think, Your Honor, that the outcome of this case is clear, and we ask this court to enter an order terminating the parental rights of Mr. Lane and Ms. Hamilton to all three children. We think the evidence presented here today and on the record in its totality speaks for itself.
Ms. Markham?
Your Honor, I do agree with the department on many of their points and justifications and reasoning. It's been reported to me since visits have increased with Mr. Lane that the children's behaviors have also somewhat increased, though they've been consistently pretty out of control throughout the case. When I talked to the foster parent, she stated that Skylar and Sean have been running out of school, trying to climb out of windows, totally disobedient. Skylar was sent home 5 times in 1 week recently. Sean's behaviors have kind of escalated again. Skylar's medications recently got switched, so they're waiting to see if that has any effect on the behaviors. Shayna has still a very super hard time going to bed. The caregiver reported that all the children are experiencing timeouts on a daily basis. That being said, when I asked the caregiver about the kids' reactions to their visits with their dad, it was reported that they look forward to seeing him. They hope that he's at the department when they arrive. According to the caregiver, none of the children really talk about their mom that much. They'll occasionally ask. They recently received a letter from her. The caregivers that currently have the children, to my knowledge, and Val, if I'm wrong, please speak up. It's my understanding that they do not plan to provide permanency. So my fear is, if the rights are terminated to these 3 children today, because of their extreme behaviors, they're going to be stuck in the foster care system for a very long time. It's hard to place children without these. It's hard to place children in pre-adoptive homes without these behaviors, let alone with their behaviors. So I guess that's kind of my rationale. To me, it's clear that Miss Hamilton has no ability to parent at this point. She needs some serious mental health help and drug use. Mr. Lane, I credit you in your sobriety, but I just don't know if Mr. Lane can get back on his feet within a reasonable time. It's already been a year. Now, a lot of that, he's been incarcerated on and off, and I get that, but I just don't see it happening within a reasonable time. So I will defer to you, Your Honor. I don't really have a straight answer for you today. I apologize.
All right, Mr. Janice.
What I pointed out is right where Ms. Marco ended, was the fact that my client has had his own problems from the time that he couldn't live with his children, but he also has shown a willingness to accommodate the needs and work toward correcting his problems. As he testified to, he doesn't mind having the substance abuse counseling, mental health counseling. He's worked toward getting the housing. If he were to get a reunification finding in the court, Section 8 would apply for appropriate housing for him. I think what we have to take into consideration as far as Mr. Lane is concerned is his concern for his children and his demonstrated, while limited, demonstrated correction of his attempts to correct his problems to provide home for his children. I think he should be given the opportunity to take advantage of the programs available and be able to keep his children. Ask the court to deny the petition to terminate this time.
Mr. Trott.
Well, obviously, I don't have a lot to offer. I would point out that this case, from my notes, it indicates we adjudicated on 6/19, so that's less than a year. So the case isn't that old. My client has made very minimal efforts. On the other hand, I would point out that the father clearly has, and this short of a case, I think he deserves a little more time. I don't see the point in terminating on one parent without the other. So in light of that situation and the father's progress lately, I'd ask the court likewise to deny the petition.
All right, as I indicated, I'll take some time, review my notes, review the record, review the pleadings in this matter, and make a decision. I guess the attorneys all know this, but for Mr. Lane's edification, there are a few different options, or a few different outcomes, I guess. I could terminate both of your parental rights based on, if I find that the evidence warrants that. I could terminate neither of your parental rights, or I could terminate one or the other. The law also allows me to, well, the law mandates that from the taking of final proofs, I have 28 days to issue that written opinion, okay? The law does allow that the decision doesn't have to be made for 70 days after the beginning of the taking of proofs or the beginning of the trial. So if I determined that you should be given some more time, I could give you up to 70 days and reset this for further proceedings at that time. That is another option. I don't know that I'm leaning toward that, but that is another option. So I guess on the chance that that becomes an option, I would look into housing now for yourself, because even if I didn't terminate your rights, I think it's going to take some time for there to be services to work toward reunification with you. So I don't think you would need the 4-bedroom house right away, regardless of what happens today. But it might not hurt if you had housing for yourself going forward. So like I said, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but those are my options. And I just want you to be aware, A, of what those options are, and B, that if I choose to put this off and have some more testimony in 70 days, anything you do between now and then will certainly be considered and would weigh, well, against you or for you, depending on what it is, okay? All right, so that's where I'm at. I'll make a decision. I'm not necessarily going with any of those options at this time. I want to review everything, but I wanted Mr. Lane to know I wanted you to know my cards are on the table. Those are the things that I can do at this hearing. And, you know, what you do, if I choose the one option, would certainly affect that, all right? All right, so we're all set for now. I'll do a written opinion with one of those, one or some of those options being laid out in that written opinion in order. You should get that within a week or so. All right? Okay, we're all set.
Mr. Lane,
Thank you, Honor.
what I want you to do.